The great hall of the Moon Court had never known silence like that before. Hundreds of wolves stood in perfect, fearful rows. Betas, elders, sentinels, and noble-blooded pack members, their heads bowed so low that their foreheads nearly touched the cold obsidian floor. Candles the color of moonlight flickered against ancient stone walls carved with the crests of every pack that had ever knelt before the throne. The air smelled of pine wood, burning wax, and something older, something that had no name but made every wolf in the room feel small. And then there was Seraphine Voss. She stood at the center of it all. Her spine was straight, her silver eyes were forward, her chin was lifted. She was the only soul in the entire Moon Court who had not bent a single knee. She was not nobility, she carried no royal crest, she had no pack, no title, no land. By every law written into the bones of their world, she had no right to stand the way she was standing. She had no right to even be inside those walls. But she was standing, and every eye in the room, including two pale gold ones burning from the throne above, was fixed on her. 3 weeks earlier, Seraphine had arrived at the court's outer gates just before dawn. She carried nothing but a worn leather satchel and a sealed letter she refused to let anyone touch. Her clothes were dusty from the road, her boots were cracked at the heel. She looked like someone who had been walking for a very long time and had not stopped to rest. The guards had laughed. Rogues, wolves without packs, were not permitted inside the Moon Court walls. Everyone knew that. Rogues were considered dangerous, unstable, lesser. The law had been the same for 400 years, and it had never once been broken. Seraphine did not argue with the guards. She did not raise her voice. She simply stepped forward and pressed one finger against the iron gate. It swung open. No key had turned, no mechanism had clicked, no guard had touched a single bolt or latch. The gate simply opened, as though the court itself had decided she was welcome. The laughter stopped immediately. She was detained before she took her third step inside. 6 guards surrounded her and walked her down into the lower chambers, where she was told to sit and wait, and not to speak unless spoken to. She sat. She waited. She did not speak. Word was sent up to the High Elder, Lord Caedmon, the oldest and most trusted advisor in the entire Moon Court, a man who had served 3 generations of kings and had not shown surprise at anything in 40 years. He came down to the lower chambers himself, which was unusual. He looked at Seraphine for a long time without speaking. His eyes moved from her face to the satchel in her lap. Something shifted in his expression, something fast and quiet, like a shadow passing across still water. Then he went pale. Every guard in the room noticed it. They had never seen Lord Caedmon look like that. Not once, not ever. He told them to release her. He gave no reason. When one of the younger guards began to ask a question, Caedmon silenced him with a look. He arranged for Seraphine to be given a small room in the court's outer hall, told no one to disturb her, and left without saying another word. He did not look at the satchel again, but the guards noticed that he had trouble walking in a straight line as he left the corridor, as though his legs were not quite steady beneath him. By nightfall, every pack representative in the court knew that a rogue woman had walked through sealed gates, shaken the composure of the High Elder, and been given a room inside the Moon Court without any explanation. By morning, they all wanted to know who she was. Nobody could find out. She had no file, no record, no pack registration. As far as the official documents of the wolf world were concerned, Seraphine Voss did not exist. King Aldrich Thorn did not make personal summons. That was the first strange thing, stranger even than the gate opening on its own. He ruled the Moon Court through decree and through his council. He communicated through messengers and official letters sealed with the royal stamp. He did not call individuals to his throne for private conversations. He certainly did not call rogues. Yet the summons came. It was handwritten on thick black paper in a clean, controlled script. The seal was black wax, stamped with the king's own personal sigil. Not the royal court seal, but the private one that he only used when something was meant for one person and no one else. The message inside was short. "Come alone. Come at midnight. Do not make me ask twice." The court buzzed with theories the moment word spread that a summons had been sent. Some believed the king meant to exile her properly, to correct whatever lapse in judgment had allowed a rogue past the gates. Others whispered darker things, that the king had sensed something unusual in her presence, that he meant to deal with it quietly before it became a larger problem. Seraphine read the letter once. She folded it carefully and placed it in her satchel beside the sealed letter she still had not allowed anyone to open. She arrived at the throne room at exactly midnight. The great hall was full. Every senior pack member, every elder, every noble-blooded wolf who had business at the court had been summoned to witness. Whatever the king intended, he intended it to be seen. The candles were all lit. The room smelled of wood smoke and old stone. Every wolf in attendance had their head inclined in the low, respectful posture that the presence of the king required. Seraphine walked to the center of the hall. She looked up at King Aldrich Thorne, sitting on his throne of carved black stone, dressed in dark formal clothing, his pale gold eyes watching her from across the room, with an expression that gave away nothing at all. She did not bow. The reaction was instant. Gasps hit the stone walls and echoed back. A senior beta stepped forward and reached for her arm. She moved aside without looking at him, cleanly and without hurry, the way someone moves when they have already thought about what is going to happen and have decided not to be surprised by it. 2 sentinels stepped forward from their posts near the throne. King Aldrich raised one hand. It was barely a motion, more like a thought that happened to involve his fingers, but both sentinels stopped immediately and stepped back. He looked at her. She looked back at him. 10 seconds passed. In a room where people had been removed from the court for speaking without permission, 10 seconds of that kind of silence felt like a very long time. The High Elder Lord Caedmon, standing to the left of the throne, had gone from pale to the color of old ash. Several of the senior nobles had gripped the fabric of their robes without realizing they were doing it. Everyone was waiting for the storm. Aldrich leaned forward in his throne. When he spoke, his voice was calm and low, not raised at all, but it filled every corner of the room, the way quiet things sometimes do, when everything else is completely still. "Where did you get that satchel?" The room stared. Those were not the words anyone had expected. Not a command, not a threat, not a formal charge, not a question about her name, or her pack, or her reason for being inside the court walls. Just that. A question about a worn leather bag carried by a rogue woman who had just refused to kneel before the most powerful wolf in the known world. Seraphine's face did not change, but her hand, resting against the side of the satchel, pressed slightly closer to it. Just for a moment, just enough for the king to see. "It was given to me," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. "By someone who told me to bring it here. To you." Aldrich stood up from his throne. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Kings did not descend from their thrones. That was not a custom or a preference. It was the architecture of how power worked in the Moon Court. Supplicants climbed toward the king. The king did not come down to meet them. It had never happened. Not in 400 years of recorded court history. Not once. He walked down the steps of the throne platform and crossed the hall floor in silence. He stopped in front of Seraphine. He was close enough that the nobles at the front of the room could see his face clearly. What they saw there was not anger. It was recognition, and underneath that recognition, visible only for a moment before he controlled it, something that looked like grief, old and heavy, and long carried. He did not reach for the satchel. He simply looked at her and waited. She opened the satchel herself and placed the sealed letter in his hands. The seal was visible to the whole room now. The nobles closest to the front leaned forward slightly, trying to make out the crest pressed into the dark wax. It was not a pack symbol. It was not any noble house or official court crest. It was something older, something that had not been seen in public for more than 2 decades. Lord Caedmon pressed both hands over his mouth and took one step backward. Aldrich broke the seal. He read. The hall was so silent that the candles could almost be heard. The flame on the nearest one bent slightly to the left, then straightened, as though even the air in the room was trying not to disturb anything. When the king finished reading, he stood still for a long moment with the letter held loosely in both hands. Then he looked up at Seraphine. His pale gold eyes were different now, not the controlled, composed eyes of a ruler managing a situation, but something beneath that, something human and undone. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since I was 12, she said. "I was waiting for you to be ready." The letter was written in the hand of Queen Maren Thorne, Aldric's mother, dead for 22 years, killed, or so the court had always been told, during the border raids that had shaken the wolf world in the years before Aldric took the throne. The raids had been declared a tragic territorial conflict. The queen's death had been declared sudden and without warning. The court had been told she left no final words, that she had no time. Her personal belongings had been collected and locked away. Her chambers had been sealed. A formal period of mourning had been observed, and then the court had moved forward, as courts always do, and Queen Maren had become a memory and a portrait on a wall, and a name spoken with respectful sadness at formal ceremonies. The letter said she had not died quickly. She had known what was coming. She had written in full, calm sentences, with careful handwriting, because she was a woman who understood that the only power she had left in those final hours was clarity. She wrote what she knew. She wrote what she had found. And she wrote the name of the person who had arranged for the border raids to happen, not as a territorial conflict, not as rogue aggression, but as a coordinated plan, built and executed from inside the Moon Court itself. It was not an accusation made in fear or desperation. It was a record, documented, reasoned, written by a queen who knew she would not survive to speak it aloud, and so had written it down instead, and trusted it to someone who could carry it safely until the time was right. The letter named the traitor, and the traitor was in the room. Every head turned. Not toward Seraphine, not toward the king, not toward the throne or the doors or the sentinels standing at their posts. Toward Lord Caedmon, the high elder who had gone pale at the gate, the man who had served 3 generations of kings and stood closest to the throne for 20 years. The trusted advisor who had wept at the queen's funeral, who had guided a grieving young king through his first years of rule, who had counseled patience and unity and loyalty in every difficult moment that the court had faced. He had not gone pale when he saw Seraphine because he feared her. He had gone pale because he recognized the satchel. He had known what was inside it. He had believed for 22 years that the letter had been destroyed, that the one loose thread in everything he had carefully built had finally been cut. And then a rogue girl with silver eyes had walked through the sealed gates of the Moon Court with the thread still in her hands, and he had felt the ground shift beneath him. He had let her in because he thought he could get close enough to intercept it. He had arranged her room in the outer hall to keep her contained. He had planned to find a quiet moment to take the satchel and make sure this time there was nothing left to find. He had not counted on her going directly to the king. He had not counted on her refusing to bow. Because that was the part none of them had understood. Not the guards, not the nobles, not the elders watching from the sides of the great hall. Seraphine had not refused to bow out of defiance. She had not done it because she was proud, or angry, or trying to make a point about rogue dignity. She had done it because bowing would have put her head down, and she had needed to keep her eyes on Lord Caedmon's face from the moment she walked through those doors. She had needed to watch him, to see the exact moment he understood what she was carrying and what she intended to do with it. Because that moment, the moment his expression broke, was the last piece of evidence she did not yet have. It was the confirmation, visible to everyone in the room, that the name in the letter was true. She had not been defying the king. She had been watching the traitor confess without saying a single word. The sentinels moved. This time, they moved toward Caedmon. Lord Caedmon, who had bowed perfectly before the throne every single day for 40 years, who had built his entire life on the appearance of loyalty, finally fell to his knees, not in reverence, not in respect. In the complete and total collapse of everything he had protected for 2 decades. They would speak of that night for generations in the Moon Court. Not because a king had descended from his throne, though that alone would have filled 100 years of retelling. Not because a sealed letter had survived 22 years of careful burial and crossed the hands of a 12-year-old girl who had grown into a woman patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. They would speak of it because of what Aldric did next. He turned back to Seraphine. This woman with no pack, no title, no land. This woman who had walked through sealed gates, crossed a room full of wolves who could have ended her without effort, and stood perfectly still while she quietly dismantled a 22-year-old lie in front of everyone who had ever believed it. He inclined his head toward her. Not deeply, not a bow, just enough. A small, deliberate movement that every person in that room recognized for exactly what it was. An acknowledgement, a recognition that something was owed that could not be repaid in a single gesture, or perhaps in a lifetime of them. You kept this safe for 22 years, he said. Someone had to, she replied. She picked up her satchel, turned, and walked out of the moon court the same way she had walked in, alone, unhurried, and entirely unbowed. The iron gates opened before she reached them, and this time, no one laughed.